Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. What? After about 3.5 years since I first started doing this series on the channel, I covered about 200 obscure games, which includes RPGs, action adventures, Souls-likes, hack and slash, and let's face it, a lot of those games I covered are pretty bad.
All changed when Bill Cockerton.
Who?
When Bill Cockerton came to power in Absurdia. He was gentle.
And after so many games I covered in this series, I think I only did one of these videos where I covered like top 10 games, and you guys loved that video, so why not do it again?
Maybe we can help each other out.
When I did that first top 10 obscure games video, I only covered about 100 games in the series. Yeah, only 100. Crazy, right? But now I'm getting closer to that 200 mark, like I said before, so I think now is the perfect time to do another one of these top 10 obscure RPGs and action adventure lists. My thought process behind making this list is to include all the games which left a lasting effect on me, which are the most memorable to me. So without further yapping and making this video longer than it should be, here are my top 10 obscure RPGs and action adventures, which I played in the past couple of years or so. Number 10. Untold Legends Dark Kingdom. Untold Legends Dark Kingdom came out in 2006 exclusively on the PlayStation 3. It's the first and the last Untold Legends game that came out on a big console and not on a handheld. I didn't know what to expect from this game at all after I saw a couple of gameplay videos. When I saw the third-person perspective, I knew it's going to feel a lot different compared to old PSP games, but I had no idea if it's going to be any good. Well, after playing it for quite a bit, I can say I enjoyed this game a lot. To be honest, I think this is my favorite Untold Legends game in general. I don't know how I missed this game back in the day, since it was a launch title for PlayStation 3. I emulated this game on PC, but unfortunately I couldn't get it to work in 60 FPS no matter what I tried. I'm pretty sure it's impossible, but if you know something I don't, I would like to hear it in the comments. Anyway, Dark Kingdom plays more like a hack and slash action adventure rather than a Diablo-like ARPG. It still has RPG elements like the itemization and different skills to get, but it feels way more streamlined compared to previous games. Some people would say it's been dumbed down for a console, but that wouldn't make a lot of sense because previous games in the series were also on a console. On a much weaker console, by the way, and they still managed to have some proper action RPG elements. Whatever the case might be, Dark Kingdom definitely feels more streamlined in general. However, that doesn't mean it plays bad. It's a lot more skill based than I expected, and it can be pretty challenging on harder difficulties. I started playing with a warrior, but I really didn't like how he plays, so I restarted the game with a scout. I was still kinda worried because the controls with the warrior were stiff, which made the combat a lot worse for me. That's almost not the case at all with the scout class, which has a much more fast-paced playstyle. I was playing on the second hardest difficulty, even with the warrior, and the game will kick your ass if you just try to button mash. You have to use your block and dodge. You're going to fail miserably if you don't, especially on harder difficulties. There is a decent amount of useful combos that you can perform. I stick with a couple of different combos for the scout, which have big AoE effects. Since you're going to fight a ton of enemies at once in this game, AoE combos and abilities are very important. The abilities you can get with the scout are pretty cool as well, and definitely essential. You can freeze enemies in time, perform a very strong attack which has the chance to instantly kill everyone, shoot a ranged projectile, a smoke bomb which confuses enemies and make them fight each other, and so on. You need to level up enough so you can unlock these abilities, but it doesn't take that long. Although it will take a while until you max out all of the abilities you want to use. I really like how the combat flows with the scout class. I use the stun spell a lot, and I just try to perform a couple of combos that hit all enemies at once. Unless there are only a couple of enemies left, so it's better to use a single target combos on them. I also maxed out the ability that can one-shot enemies, which is pretty cool when it happens, and I used this Shadow Cloak spell which will increase the chance to dodge. But that spell is only useful in specific situations when you're really close to death, which happened quite a bit actually. The boss fights are better than in the previous game, but they're still not very good in general. They are much easier compared to fights against multiple enemies, so take that as you will. All classes have a unique animation for dodge, and I think the mage dodge is the best. Scout's dodge is very cool as well, she propels forward and covers a lot of terrain. I think there are more than enough spells for these classes, but what I didn't like is the progression itself. This just doesn't feel like an action RPG progression by any stretch of imagination. Even the second game was kinda weak when it comes to this, but not as weak as the latest entry in the series. Even the stats are streamlined, up to the point where I was wondering why they even bothered to include them. It's not a standard RPG stat sheet, it's just boring stuff like increasing your health or mana a little bit, damage or physical and magic defense. I mean, there is certainly a place for such stats in games like this, but not as the primary stuff you have to worry about when leveling up. I don't think these stats even do that much, to be honest. You won't feel a big difference when you dump points into them. It seems like this studio wasn't really sure what kind of a game they want to make, judging by how they handle these features. There are some weird design decisions in this game, like the healing system or the lack of it. This time around there is no potions and you can't heal in combat. Killing enemies can heal you a bit and recharge your mana, but there are no potions to use, which makes the difficulty of the game much higher in general. You have to find these checkpoints where you can spend the currency to heal or use it to buy new items. I like when developers try something new, but if it's not designed properly, it ends up being annoying. In this case, the lack of healing items creates a very artificial feeling of difficulty, which encourages cheesy gameplay. You are basically forced to revisit the last known checkpoint just to heal a little bit or try to skip a lot of enemies to reach the next checkpoint. This was the case on the second hardest difficulty, so I can't really speak for other difficulty options. When the difficulty of the game comes from limiting factors which have nothing to do with the combat, you're just making the gameplay more annoying and tedious for almost no reason at all. This game kinda encourages the player to play aggressively because you will get healed while doing some damage, but it's not that consistent in order to rely on it. Another problem is the currency itself. I never had enough to buy some shiny items from the store because I spent it all on healing. This could have been easily fixed if they just added the option for the player to be fully healed once he reaches the checkpoints. I refused to do some grinding that would definitely make things a lot easier, but I just didn't have the motivation to do it in this game. Like I said many times before, I'm not against grinding in RPGs, but you have to give me a strong enough reason to do it. If this game had some strong RPG elements and progression, I would probably do it. That being said, I think the game has a solid amount of challenging fights, and it requires you to play carefully and use almost all mechanics. Everywhere you go in this game, you'll be surrounded by a bunch of enemies, and they just keep coming, just like the dragons in Gothic 2.
His last order was, "Come!" And they came, all of them, even the dragons.
Dark Kingdom is very goal-oriented, which means that you usually just have to ignore a lot of enemies and do exactly what the quest told you to do. I mean, sometimes that will include killing everything you see on the screen, but like I said, enemies just keep respawning all the time. It can be a bit frustrating because enemies are always on top of you no matter how many you kill, but the game expects you to follow the mission objectives. Those mission objectives are usually very simple, but the game did a decent job of making them interesting and varied. Sure, sometimes they can be annoying, like having to activate all of these shrines by finding crystals all over the map and going back and forth, but for the most part, the game does a good job with objectives. There are even some puzzles to solve, which are fine, I guess. There are moments when this game tries to implement some platforming segments which are downright horrible. Jumping around in this game just doesn't feel good, which is like the main thing you need to get right in order for this to work. Even though over-the-shoulder camera is decent for combat, it's horrible for platforming. That's because the camera turns automatically when you turn your character. You can't actually control it like in normal third-person games. This makes it harder to have precision of movement, especially on some of these levels which require it, but it's not a big deal. Some parts of the levels are just horrible to play while in this camera mode, especially in tight corridors. And sometimes the game will just decide for you which camera perspective is the best and you won't be able to change it. It makes the game a bit worse, but overall I think over-the-shoulder camera is a nice addition to this franchise. The game starts with this camera perspective by default, so I guess that's how the developers intended the game to be played. You can use the isometric camera as well, which made the game feel more like older games in the series. Come to think of it, not many games give you the option to play in third person or isometric mode. It's pretty cool. The only ARPG I can remember that's on top of my mind is Sacred 2. As for the story, it's almost exactly the same like in the second game. At least when it comes to the main objective, you have to stop the king again. I still like the story of the second game the most, but it's a very low bar to set. The story is really basic in all three games, and you shouldn't try to play them just for the story itself, because you'll get really disappointed.
I hardly see how myths and legends will help our current situation, wizard.
Call it what you will, but it is no myth.
Overall, I like this game quite a bit, despite all its issues, and I would recommend trying it out. Even though I had zero expectations before I tried this game out, I ended up liking it quite a bit because it's a very enjoyable hack and slash action RPG, and the one and only Untold Legends, a game that came out on a proper, big device, I guess, that's not only on PSP. So I was really surprised by all the reviews it got. But I guess a part of that is because it was a PS3 launch title and people expected a lot more, I guess, which is a completely valid criticism, but I still end up liking it quite a bit. I enjoyed the action and I think it got overlooked a little bit, so yeah, that's one of the reasons why it ended up being on my top 10 obscure RPGs and action adventure list. Number 9. Forgotten Realms, Demon Stone.
The gem is to the east. Follow me.
Stay alert. There could be more of those things.
Demon Stone is a game that I covered with a 20-minute dedicated video back in May. I never covered this game in this series, and I know a lot of people will miss it because of that, so I wanted to include the shorter version here. The Forgotten Realms, Demon Stone, is an action role-playing game which played really similar to PlayStation 2 Lord of the Rings games. And for a good reason, it's developed by the same studio and in the same game engine. The game engine had a lot of improvements, especially when it comes to the visuals, but the gameplay felt very similar to Two Towers. I've beat this game not so long ago, and we're going to talk about all major features and about my experience with Demon Stone in general. This game came out on PlayStation 2, Xbox and PC, and you can get it on GOG nowadays. The reason why I didn't play the GOG version is because I just couldn't get my controller to work properly. Mouse and keyboard controls for the game are not very good to say the least, so I decided to stick with the emulated PS2 version. Even though the visuals of this game are noticeably outdated, Demon Stone has a timeless artistic style which actually blew me away more than a couple of times. There are a lot of impressive scenarios that you're going to see on pretty much all levels. The distant terrain and the background of these levels are usually very busy. Some levels have an impressive amount of NPCs on the screen at once. I think Demon Stone still looks great despite the poor visual fidelity, and this is just another example of why the artistic style is way more important. Visual variety is very strong as well, and all levels from chapter 1 to chapter 10 have a unique look. I would say that even the character models look great for a 2004 game. Demon Stone is just pure action with little to no downtime in between. Stormfront Studios has been very creative with the set pieces in the game, and you'll get to experience a lot of them during your playthrough. The visual progression of your three characters is pretty good as well. You can buy different looking armor sets and some weapons for all of your characters between the chapters.
Now what do we do?
Now let's talk about the story and the gameplay. The game begins in the middle of a huge battle between two orcs' army. These intro scenes are really reminiscent of those beginning segments in Two Towers and Return of the King games. You start playing as a human warrior called Renek, and after about 5 minutes you meet other two protagonists called Jai and Ilius. Jai is a rogue and Ilius is the mage, and you're able to switch between these characters in 90% of situations. Shortly after the beginning of the game, your party accidentally released the warlords Yegori and Sireka from their imprisonment in a demon stone. So your ultimate goal is to stop these warlords and imprison them again. You're only going to meet a handful of friendly characters during your playthrough, and one of them is a well-known face in Dungeons & Dragons universe.
This charm was forged by the Wood Elves of the High Forest, your cousins.
Drizzt Do'Urden is not only a story character in this game, he's also a playable character as well, at least for some time. The story itself in Demon Stone is just not very good, but like I said before, the presentation is top notch, so it makes it up for the lackluster story, in a way. There is a decent amount of cutscenes on each level, and I found them very enjoyable, but not because of the story itself. The dialogue was okay, and even the voice acting is pretty good.
Gaul must have marked its walls. He found a way to reach out with his mind and draw you three to him.
My father was right. No good came of me.
Ilias, you're still a knight of Silvery Moon, and now you have a dire task to perform.
Although that shouldn't come as a big surprise, because this game has an elite cast of voice actors like Patrick Stewart, Michael Clark Duncan, Dan Riordan, Vanessa Marshall, and so on. So Demon Stone had everything it needs for a great story, except the story itself.
Agreed.
This game really lacks an interesting overarching plot. I mean, it's not bad when you have such simple premise for the main story. It's actually desirable in most cases because the best stories are usually very simple. Now let's talk about the gameplay.
Get the archers!
Like I already mentioned, you play the game with 3 different characters. It's like a party-based RPG in a way, and you have a warrior, mage, and a rogue. The action gameplay is more like a hack and slash than anything else. It's a bit spammy for sure, and your thumb is probably going to hurt a little bit after you finish this game. At first, the combat didn't seem all that good, but it gets better and better the more you play. That's because you start unlocking more combat moves and abilities for all characters, and the enemies get a bit smarter and start using more moves in combat. However, you can almost always rely on the brainless 1-2-3 simple combo, especially with the warrior. Somewhere near the late game, enemy NPCs won't allow you to spam your attacks just like that. You'll have to block some of them or move out of the way, because block doesn't work against everything. Well, not with the warrior and the rogue at least. Ilios, the mage, has the strongest spell block, which can pretty much block everything, even the boss spells. His attacking spell is also very strong, and you're going to use him a lot, especially against bosses. Speaking of mechanics I used a lot, I used the repost mechanic quite a bit with the warrior. When you block, you can press the attack right after, and he will do a pretty strong attack. Or when you're stunned on the ground, you can quickly recover with a basic attack, but all of this has to be unlocked first. It's very easy to level up and get those abilities, because you only need the points from leveling up, and you'll have plenty of them as long as you progress. You'll unlock more skills and powerful versions of the same skill when you reach a higher level. You'll need gold for buying some of the gear for all 3 characters. Again, very easy to do as long as you progress into the game. The RPG elements of this game are very basic, but they certainly add to the overall experience. I would rather have the basic RPG systems than not having them at all. All of these characters have unique moves and abilities, but they essentially play the same on the most fundamental gameplay level. You have a simple combo system for your attacks, and all 3 characters share some of the combat moves. But you also have a very decent amount of different moves to learn as you level up, and some exclusive abilities for all characters. After about a couple of chapters, all 3 characters get some unique moves. For example, Renek has a ground slam which will shatter some objects, and Jai can jump. Yeah, jumping is an exclusive ability that only the rogue can do. Look, this game simply doesn't give a shit about telling you anything. For example, in order to finish off this dragon, you have to subdue him with the mage, hit his head with the warrior, and then do a jumping attack with the rogue. I mean, that's fine, I don't have a problem with that. I just don't think these special powers are utilized enough in the game. Putting that aside, the new combos and abilities you can learn while leveling up can be fun to use. It's cool to see it every once in a while, but like I said before, using the most basic brain dead combo is usually the most effective move. The stealth from Jai is very good because she can execute enemies as long as she attacks them from behind. And you can kinda abuse this mechanic from time to time, but it doesn't feel cheap. The AI characters are pretty damn smart, and it takes a lot for them to die on their own. They will just relentlessly defend when their health is low, and they will try to heal when possible. I think the balancing is very well done in general, except a couple of extremely frustrating objectives. The boss fights are well done, and I did enjoy all of them. They start off very simple with just a few mechanics, and they never get overly complicated. But the bosses have a decent amount of moves, or even a couple of phases for some bosses. For example, the dragon fight has two entirely different phases. When he flies around you, you have to hit him with ranged spells, and when he's on the ground, chasing you through a narrow hallway, which was a bit more scripted scenario. What they didn't even mention yet is the ultimate skills and the party synergy. All three characters have special bars that can fill up, and very powerful attack they can perform when the bar is filled. Although these attacks are useless against bosses, but they will wipe the floor with regular enemies on the map. Ultimately, I think Demon's Stone has a great hack and slash action gameplay. I'm really glad I decided to try this game out, and I would heavily recommend it, especially if you love those old Lord of the Rings games like Two Towers and Return of the King.
You're still a knight of Silvery Moon, and now you have a dire task to perform.
Even though Demon's Stone was not a better game than those Lord of the Rings PlayStation 2 games, it was still a very enjoyable experience and a real hidden gem if you ask me, so it easily gets the spot in this top 10 list. Number 8. Stray Blade.
I thought that this would be my biggest adventure, but how big it would be, I could have never known.
Stray Blade is a Souls-like RPG released in 2023 for PC, Xbox Series X and S, and PlayStation 5. I remember playing this game when it first came out and being very disappointed and frustrated. I ended up quitting the game after only about 5 hours of gameplay. My memory is a little bit clouded, but I remember the gameplay being very janky and not enjoyable at all. I was very disappointed because I was following the development of this game before it came out. I remember doing a video before it came out and including Stray Blade in one of my videos about the most anticipated new games or something like that. My plans for making a review for this game never came to life and I just forgot about it. Unfortunately, pretty much everyone forgot about this game shortly after it released. It only reached around 350 players online at one point, on Steam at least. And yeah, that one player right now was me. I had no idea what to expect when I came back to this game for the purposes of this video. I expected to be disappointed again, but I remember seeing some big updates before I started playing the game again. Apparently one of these updates changed and improved the combat quite a bit. And yeah, they were not kidding, the combat is way better than I remember. It flows smoothly, it has better defense mechanics, and to quote our god and savior Todd Howard, it just works. Unfortunately, this great combat update didn't bring a lot of people back or attracted a new audience of people. So I hope this video will bring at least a little bit exposure to this game, because it's a solid Souls-like action RPG.
Wait. What the hell are you even talking about?
Not amazing or outstanding, but pretty much everything about this game can be described as solid, or mediocre if you will. You play as a rogue adventurer who likes to talk to himself a lot.
With you? It shouldn't be that hard to find a way out of here.
Until he meets his little friend called Boji, so he has someone else to talk with.
Exactly. So, now that all questions are out of the way...
You don't make any sense. Why should I believe you, a talking wolf monster?
I didn't mind the dialogue at all, and I think the voice acting was decent. Same can be said about the story itself as well, but it was like whatever to me. You're pretty much just exploring and discovering the history of this world, and that's your story in a nutshell. You're trying to figure out what happened and why this land turned hostile all of a sudden. That's all I got from the story, and I don't think it's bad, it's good enough for a game like this. I mean, most Souls-likes like to be very mysterious and rely on environmental storytelling, so having a more traditional, linear story is more than welcome if you ask me. As for the gameplay, Stray Blade has all the bells and whistles of a Souls-like action RPG. Dodging and parrying are huge mechanics that you'll have to use a lot. Your stamina, or energy as the game calls it, can be regenerated by performing a timed dodge, and you can see this with the green visual effects. I don't remember this being the case before, but like I said, my memory is not so great when it comes to this game. One thing is for sure, the game feels way smoother now, and I ended up using the parry mechanic a lot. It works great against pretty much all enemies, and it's very rewarding. All weapon types have unique playstyles with different attack animations. I love the default two-handed sword and its special attacks. All enemies have stamina as well, and when you bring their stamina bar to 0, you can perform a finishing move. I had a lot of fun trying to parry everything, which brings their stamina down quite a bit, and it allows you to use the execute mechanic very often.
Dramatic fun!
The combat starts flowing very well once you get the hang of these mechanics. I would say the timing required for these mechanics is somewhere in the middle. It's not very hard, and it's definitely not very easy. If you decide to dodge more than parry, when you learn to time it properly, you can play very aggressively because you can regenerate stamina very fast. All of this was new to me because the game definitely didn't work like this before. The progression system is related to all of these weapon types in the game. You can increase some of your base stats and the weapon types of your choice. There is a separate progression skill tree for your little buddy, and his abilities are pretty damn good. But you'll have to find these special items by exploring different maps in the game to get these points. All weapons have to be crafted by getting a blueprint for enemies and necessary materials from exploring and looting stuff in general. Then you need to find one of these forges, and you can craft items with a press of a button, if you have the required materials. Now, all of this sounds like deja vu to me, and I have to mention another very similar game which came out in 2025. Blades of Fire is a sleeper hit of 2025, and I love the gameplay in that game. This game really reminds me of Blades of Fire for more than a couple of reasons. Getting blueprints and crafting weapons, the art style is kinda similar, although I think Blades of Fire look way better, and just in general I think these two games are very similar. To be completely honest, even though Stray Blade offers a solid experience now, the game only makes me want to play Blades of Fire again. I know that's probably not fair to say, but it's just the truth. Anyway, I did like the map design in this game and how you can clear all enemies. When the game tells you that you cleared all enemies in the area, they will stop respawning even after your death. But when you come back to those areas, you'll find some other enemies, which is pretty cool. So it's not just a mindless respawning simulator like most Souls-like games, which makes it a little bit more interesting. And you can also find some very strong enemies that you can't handle right away, so coming back to previous areas makes a bit more sense. Boss fights can also be described as solid. They have decent amount of mechanics that you have to worry about, but none of them are very crazy, and that's perfectly fine by me. Stray Blade is not a crazy good game by any means, but a decent Souls-like RPG that's very easy to recommend to Souls-like fans.
I need some alternative to this. Wake up!
Number 7. Lionheart, Legacy of the Crusader. Lionheart Legacy of the Crusader is a PC ARPG from 2003. I had no idea what to expect here, except those amazing early 2000s RPG aesthetics. I just love the look of these old RPGs, and I actually want to do a video about this topic soon. Anyway, Lionheart has an amazing early game which caught me by surprise. The game takes place in 5088, and it begins in an alternative version of Barcelona. Before that, your character starts as a prisoner who managed to escape with the help of the spirit form. This spirit form is possessing your character, and every now and then you get to interact with it. Apparently some assassins were attacking the prison, and they were going to kill you if you didn't manage to escape. Shortly after this, you end up in Barcelona, and the game gives you a great freedom of choice. You can join one of 4 different factions that you can find in Barcelona and its vicinity. I decided to join Knight Templars, but you can go with the Inquisition, Knights of Saladin and the Wielders. You'll also find some minor factions in the game that you can either support or try to destroy. When you start exploring the city of Barcelona, you will find out about the war between thieves and the beggars. I love the dialogue options in this game. I thought the writing was pretty good, and you almost always have an important choice to make. You can straight up attack and kill a lot of these NPCs, and having such freedom of choice is very cool. What's also very cool is all the historical characters you're going to meet in this game. Leonardo da Vinci is one of the main characters, but you also meet William Shakespeare, Machiavelli, Miguel de Cervantes, and I'm pretty sure there are more.
Welcome to Barcelona, jewel of the world.
Not only meet them, but do some side quests for them as well. I failed the quest with Machiavelli when a bunch of assassins tried to, well, assassinate him. But I reloaded the save and did the quest again. Like I said, the choices and consequences are pretty good in this game. As for the main quest, your character discovered that he's a descendant of Richard the Lionheart and he gets some special powers. You will then follow the main story with your desired faction. A rip in the fabric of time introduced magic into this world, and some people think the use of magic is straight up evil, like the Inquisition. It's worth mentioning that this game also has some great voice acting. The voice acting parts are very selective and it doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes, but when it happens it's usually very good, especially for 2003 standards.
Salutations and greetings to you. I am Melpomene's confidant and Thalia's clown. A playwright poor in coin but rich in talent. I have a moment if you wish to speak.
Exploring Barcelona felt great and I had a lot of fun in the early game. To put it simply, the early game has everything I like to see in my RPGs. An interesting hook for the story, plenty of RPG options, interesting characters and multiple joinable factions.
You are most kind to say so.
And the freedom to explore the game before you choose to make your next move. Everything except a great combat system. Action combat in this game is very janky and it leaves a lot to be desired. It's not horrible and I got used to it very fast and I was totally ready to look past its shortcomings if the game continues to be amazing like it was in the beginning. Surely it's going to continue being amazing. Surely.
I will not be made a fool of again.
Moving around in this game is very clumsy and slow. The default moving speed is just very slow, which quickly becomes a problem. It didn't bother me that much when I first got to explore some new areas. But when you constantly go back to areas that you previously discovered, it becomes a much more annoying problem. You will find some teleportation stones, which makes the traveling a bit less annoying, but it's not exactly fixing the issue. The combat feels very janky as well. Clicking on something specific can be a pain in the ass, because the game can be really imprecise. The feedback in combat is almost non-existing, which makes the already underwhelming action even more underwhelming. The combat uses dice rolls to determine the damage you're going to deal, along with other RPG stats and skills. I was playing a predetermined two-handed melee character, but you can also make a completely custom build. The character selection has some very decent depth to it, but the progression itself ends up being very disappointing. I was expecting to learn some new melee skills or make a unique build, but the skill tree for this is bare bones. You can only increase the passive skill level of weapon types, which is useful but very boring. Like many other features in the game, the progression feels very undercooked. It's not like the progression completely lacks active abilities that you can use in and out of combat. There are just few and far between, and mostly some utility spells or buffs. You start the game with a spell from the spirit kind, the spirit that possesses your character from the very beginning. This was actually a very useful spell, because it allowed me to heal a little bit by absorbing dead bodies. I also had a fear spell that I rarely used, along with some useful buffs. Other than that, I was just bonking people with my big sword. I did like the itemization system and the visual progression. However, my combat experience was really bad in the beginning, especially because I was forced to use one-handed weapons. I invested a lot of points into two-handed skill, only to find a two-handed weapon a couple of hours after I started playing. I would just miss a lot of hits and die in combat, a lot, because my one-handed skill was very low. It made this underwhelming combat even worse, but once I got my first two-handed weapon, the combat experience became a little bit better. Still not very good though, because the fundamentals of this combat system are pretty weak. And we came to the biggest problem with the game. Even though Lionheart started almost perfectly, it ends up hyper-focusing on its weakest feature, which will be the combat. The early and part of the mid-game felt perfectly fine because there was a great balance between the story, RPG features, exploration and combat. The game seemed to have everything. But the second part of the game almost completely focuses on combat and it throws a lot of enemies at you all the time. Those RPG features that I praised before are almost completely absent in the second part of the game. And the combat itself is not nearly good enough to carry the weight of the whole game. It's a shame because this RPG could have been remembered as other great ARPGs like Diablo, Divine Divinity, Sacred, and similar titles.
You are most kind to say so.
Sadly, it feels very unfinished, which is probably the main reason it got forgotten nowadays. Lionheart Legacy of the Crusader is a game that has almost a perfect introduction to an CRPG that I ever played, and even though it has some glaring issues later in the game, like the underwhelming combat system, and it feels really unfinished in certain areas, I still believe it's worth checking out because it's a very unique CRPG that most people probably missed. Number 6. Folklore. Folklore was a PlayStation 3 exclusive, which came out in 2007. It's described as an action role-playing video game, but I would say it's actually a blend of at least a couple of different genres. The story is told with stylized, interactive dialogue menus, small and big cutscenes. I don't play visual novel games, but if I would have to guess how these games present their stories, it would be something like this. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Of course not!
Anyway, Folklore has to be one of the most bizarre games that I ever played. Bizarre in the best way possible, I mean, not bizarre for the sake of being bizarre. I was not expecting much from this game before I started playing because it didn't seem like something I would enjoy. Well, the game proved me wrong, because it's a very high quality title in general. As for the game itself, the story follows two main characters, a young journalist named Keats and a young woman named Ellen. You can choose to play as one of these characters and push the story forward. But both characters have their own role to play in the main story, and they will interact with each other. They also have different paths in the story, and ultimately, you'll have to push the story forward with both characters in order to understand the murder mystery in the village. Yeah, that's the main theme of the story. There was a murder in the village called Dolin, and you have to solve the mystery behind the murder. That includes doing some detective work during the day in the village and fighting weird monsters at night. I started playing the game as the journalist Keats, and I just scratched the surface of the Ellen story arc. I really didn't expect to like this story that much, or the game to be honest, but I ended up loving the game in general. You will interact with some very bizarre characters in order to solve this murder case. The writing is very clever and interesting, although there is no voice acting in dialogue, so you'll have to do some reading. Not a ton of reading, I guess, because these dialogue interactions are not very long. The game has a bunch of little cutscenes which are fully voice acted, and they make the story a lot more engaging and interesting.
But what powers can she possibly have to cause disaster there? She only went to search for her mother.
The portal to the netherworld lies beyond here.
All of a sudden, the simple journalist becomes a detective who is trying to solve this complicated murder case. During the day, you will explore the village of Dolling, ask around about your current quest and try to get more information from NPCs. There is something different going on each time you visit the village again. For example, a new NPC will show up and talk with you, you will unlock a certain part of the map that you couldn't access before, and so on. During this part of the gameplay, you're not able to engage in combat with anyone. Shortly after you start the game, you will discover the realm of the dead called the Netherworld. The Netherworld is filled with various hostile creatures, and this is where the game introduces its combat mechanics, which are quite unique. Every time you kill a new type of a creature, you'll get to use their special powers. I guess we can make some comparison with Pokemon games, since you're capturing different monsters and using their abilities in combat. It's like Pokemon, but in a more bizarre way, and instead of tactical turn-based combat, Folklore has an action combat system. This combat system is entirely based around the powers you collect from these creatures. Both main characters have a distinctive playstyle. Kid can also turn into a much powerful version of himself, which allows you to deal a lot more damage with all abilities. At first, the enemies you get to fight are brain dead and very easy, but it gets more challenging the more you progress. You will also fight bosses with special mechanics. Before you can get these unique abilities from enemies, or folk creatures as the game calls them, you have to use a special mechanic to absorb the souls. You have to press R1 when they turn red, and you also have to jerk your controller upwards. Yeah, this game uses 6-axis motion on the controller, not only in these particular gameplay moments. I played the game with my DualSense PS5 controller, and this mechanic works almost flawlessly. However, it gets a bit boring to do it over and over again, because you're going to kill a lot of enemies. Luckily, the game allows you to absorb multiple souls at once if you deal enough damage to them. Stronger enemies and bosses will push this even further, and you sometimes need to shake your controller or do the same jerking motion with precise timing. All of these motion mechanics work great, and I found them interesting in general. They blend with regular gameplay quite well. When in combat, you can only use 4 different abilities at the same time. But you can always enter the ability menu and switch up your abilities however you want, even in the middle of the combats. Enemies will have resistances to certain types of abilities. This will force you to switch up your abilities on regular basis. It's pretty fun because you won't have to play for long to learn a lot of new abilities and fight various types of enemies. Even some destructible items on these maps can only be broken with certain abilities. There are defensive abilities that you'll get from some enemies which are pretty much essential for not dying in a fight. You also get a simple dodge mechanic as well. These abilities can be ranged or melee, and they can have big AoEs or focus more on single target damage and so on. You can only use a certain amount of abilities until your mana bar drains, but it will regenerate very fast after only a few seconds. It's not called a mana bar, but that's essentially what it is. I forgot the name. I think this game balances out the action and the story segments quite well. It keeps the combat from being repetitive and slightly annoying with those motion mechanics. On the other side, the story keeps you engaged because it's pretty good in general, and you want to learn what's going to happen next, at least I did. Combined with the unconventional presentation and interactive cutscenes, Folklore managed to offer a truly unique experience. I would highly recommend trying this game out, even if you think it's not your type of a game, like I did.
The spirits led me here, to the netherworld. An ancient tale of a voyage to the netherworld.
I gotta be honest, Folklore never looked like a game that I would personally enjoy, even though I watched a couple of videos before I covered it myself, but I decided to check it out because a lot of people were recommending it to me in the comments, and it seemed like a real hidden gem in a way. Even though it's not exactly as obscure as some other titles on this list, I still think it's definitely worth checking out because it's a very unique RPG. It even tries to blend a couple of different genres together, I guess. You have some even visual novels elements, the way the story is told, but there are still some pretty good RPG elements in it, and you play the whole game pretty much like a summoner, basically. You use magic in an interesting combat system that's not your typical ARPG hack and slash, or nothing close to that actually, and it has a pretty good story and characters, so it's an easy recommend, and it easily deserves to be on this top 10 list. Number 5. Marlow, Briggs and the Mask of Death.
I don't think I can make that
Marlow, Briggs and the Mask of Death is a hack and slash action adventure. It came out in 2013 on PC and Xbox 360, but it feels even older than that, to be honest. Not in a negative way though, it just feels like an early Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 action adventure. This game is all about crazy non-stop action gameplay with crazy presentation and little to no downtime in between. That alone will probably determine if you're going to love or hate this game. As soon as you press that new game button, you'll get a very short introduction cutscene and the setup for the story, and then it's all action from there. with occasional mini in-game cutscenes. As you probably guessed already, you play as a guy called Marlow Briggs. His girlfriend is called Eva Torres, and she plans to quit her job, so both of them decide to visit her boss at the dig sites. Eva's job was to decipher various Mayan codices, and her boss is still not done with the job, so he doesn't want to let her go that easy. This is where shit hits the fan. Eva's boss, Hank Long, gives the order to his people to kill Marlow and kidnap Eva.
Oh God, please!
Marlow gets stabbed by these strange Mayan sites. Imagine going on a vacation and you get stabbed by an ancient Mayan artifact. It turns out that site also has a mask of death, which somehow brings Marlow back to life. The spirit of a long-dead Mayan king called Tep joins Marlow as a spiritual companion. He frequently talks with Marlow and gives him tips for the gameplay. I think these two are actually very interesting together, and the dialogue is very enjoyable.
How am I supposed to get through that?
I sense an explosive development in your immediate future.
The presentation in the game is freaking crazy, as you can probably see from these clips.
What the hell? I killed you!
Yeah? Well, I'm back!
If at first you don't succeed.
Hand to us! Watch your head! Swing right! No right!
You're mostly fighting enemies like this, but the game will switch it up quite a bit during your playthrough. So you'll end up controlling a turret and shooting down 20 helicopters, or the game suddenly turns into a bullet hell shooter, because why not? All of this is very fun to look at, and more importantly, fun to play. While I do like the crazy presentation a lot, it can get very annoying sometimes. The camera can be all over the place, while everything around you is exploding or something crazy is going on. Those moments are usually happening very fast, and it's not like this game requires you to have some crazy reaction time. Even so, that doesn't make these moments any less annoying, because you can't see anything from all the shit happening in the background, camera shaking and visual effects. Putting those small issues aside, I really like the presentation. Now let's talk about what actually matters here. The gameplay in Marlow Briggs is surprisingly very good. The combat has a combo system where you get to combine a couple of buttons for different attacks. Nothing is stopping you from just mashing the attack button, but you won't deal a lot of damage like this. Marlow can also dodge with the right thumbstick in all directions, which you only have to use when you're fighting tougher opponents with health bars. There is a block button as well that also works as a parry, and the game teaches you early on to parry projectiles from ranged NPCs. Some enemies have strong shields, and you need to use the little combo to break them. I think the game introduces a decent amount of enemy types as you go. It's not a crazy amount of enemies, and you will fight those regular bandits that you meet in the beginning until the very end. This game is pretty short, so there's nothing wrong with that, and it never felt repetitive to me. Marlow will unlock some special attacks as well, like this big AoE fire attack and some other abilities later on. You can improve some of these abilities when you get enough points. It's a very straightforward progression system. It's good enough for this type of a game, but it's very simplistic. The feel of the combat is impactful and punchy, and it has a decent sense of weight. The controls are great as well, you probably won't have any problems with that. All of this makes the combat in Marlow Briggs very enjoyable, and it was hard to put the controller down. It's one of those older games that have no fluff, no downtime, it's all about the action 100% of the time. And that's such a refreshing thing to experience in 2026. There is some light platforming and simple puzzles as well. You have the ability to double jump, which makes these sections pretty fun actually. A little bit stiff sometimes, but pretty fun nonetheless. Big boss fights are a bit gimmicky, like in most similar games back then, but not bad, and like I said before, you'll fight a lot of these smaller elite enemies or mini-bosses. This game really hooked me the moment I tried it, and it was a very enjoyable experience. So it's easy to recommend to anyone, especially if you like what you see here. It's easily one of the best action adventures that I played in this series. Marlow, Briggs and the Mask of Death is a game that I just covered in this series just a week ago, and it already gained a spot in the top 10 list, and I was really impressed with it, up to the point where I almost put it on number 1, but I reserved that spot for another RPG, so yeah, I really think this game is overlooked and extremely underrated. Someone said it's God of War from Temu, but f that guy, this is a great game. Number 4. Alexander, the Hero's Hour. Alexander the Hero's Hour is a role-playing real-time strategy game that came out in 2004 for PC. This is easily one of the most obscure games that I cover in this series, and I don't say that lightly. It's pretty damn hard to find any info about this game online, let alone some YouTube videos about it. You won't even find it on sites like Metacritic or find any reviews from major gaming outlets like IGN. Yeah, it's really forgotten, and I would be surprised if anyone who watches the video actually remembers this game.
We had given up all hope.
So it must suck, right? Well, no, it's actually a pretty fun game if you're willing to tolerate some of its shortcomings. And if you like RPGs/RTS hybrids, I would even say it's a must-play, especially if you like games like Dungeon Siege or Warcraft 3 even. What sucks about it is that you'll have to go out of your way and find a working copy online, which is not that hard to be honest if you're used to downloading abandonware games. First of all, I have to talk about the visuals and the performance. It's yet another 2004 game on this list, but unlike the previous 2004 game that we talked about, I think Alexander aged pretty damn well. In fact, I think this game still looks great, despite the outdated low texture resolution. Alexander managed to create a very good atmosphere while playing the game, and the visuals are a huge reason for that, as well as the soundtrack. I think they nailed the artistic style for this ancient Greek setting. I almost said the Greek mythology setting, but this game doesn't have any mythology elements. Come to think of it, I can't remember that I ever played an RPG that was set in ancient Greece which didn't have any mythology elements. It's almost like a requirement or something, but Alexander doesn't care. Anyway, like I said, the game looks pretty damn good for its age. It reminds me a little bit of Titan Quest, which is one of my most favorite games ever. These maps have some decent amount of detail for a top-down game from 2004. The character models look pretty bad if you zoom in, but that's just the nature of such old games. You'll still be able to enjoy some decent visual progression for your characters when you upgrade your gear, so it's good enough for me. Another reason why this game aged so well is how it works on modern PCs. Now, I can't for the life of me wrap my head around this, and I hope somebody explains this to me in the comments. How in the living fuck does this random ass forgotten game from 2004 works better than 90% of well-known games from this time period? I mean, come on. Especially when it comes to the UI scaling and just running the game on high resolutions in general. The majority of older games won't work properly, but then we have freaking Alexander the Hero's Hour that works out of the box. It's legit pissing me off. Anyway, speaking of UI, it's pretty to look at and it just screams early 2000s, which is just music to my ears. Or eyes, I guess. I don't know what I'm talking about. I only had a handful of crashes while playing, but other than that I had zero technical issues, so you probably won't have any problems while trying to run this game today. Now let's finally talk about the gameplay. As I mentioned before, if you love Dungeon Siege series or just CRPGs with real-time pause, you might like this game as well. You start the game by controlling 3 heroes. There is a short tutorial, which kinda sucks to be honest, but it's good enough to learn some basic mechanics. Alexander himself is your tutorial guide, and you will also do missions with him after the tutorial. The way the whole game works is very similar to older RTS games. You have a bunch of preset missions you'll have to do in order to follow the main story. You're basically helping Alexander the Great in these scenarios by doing specific tasks. All missions have a couple of main quests and a bunch of side quests you can do, but the game is very linear in general. That was a bit disappointing, but then again, it's also the reason why these missions are so varied and fun. Before you start each mission, you'll have the chance to sort out your gear, stash or buy some items from the merchants. But even when you begin the mission, you can also use your inventory and get new items by just picking them up from dead enemies. All of your heroes have separate inventories with a decent amount of slots for the gear. Your heroes will gain experience for each kill or some side activities you can do on the map, like playing a little minigame. They can also lose experience when they die, and if all 3 of them die, you'll fail the mission. The game starts off pretty easy, but it won't take a while until you realize that you really need to pay attention to major gameplay features. Those would include how you build your 3 characters and how you use them in combat. All of them have traditional RPG leveling up system with a bunch of different skills you can increase. Leveling up in this game is fast, a bit too fast and annoying sometimes, to be honest. All special skills that you can get upon leveling up are very useful or even mandatory sometimes. For example, when you first encounter enemies on horses, they can literally one-shot you if you're not careful. One of your heroes has a specific skill which allows him to kick enemies from their horse, which is extremely useful in those situations. Stamina is another important mechanic for all of your heroes, because that's the resource they use for special abilities. But it's also used for running on the map, which kinda sucks. You'll get to control some other characters as well on certain missions, but only these 3 heroes can be used in greater depth. Other characters are just like common soldiers, and you can give them some basic commands. Since the game is pretty linear, this gave the developers a complete control over all encounters you're going to have. And I say that in a good way, because the missions and quests are pretty varied, and more importantly, they are fun. What's not so fun are the controls, like I said before. Nothing in this game happens instantly, it can feel extremely sluggish and janky. I can't even zoom out the camera properly, even though the game technically allows you to do this. But once you zoom in, you won't be able to zoom out for some freaking reason. Moving your heroes around is so cumbersome and you'll be fighting the controls for the entire time. The game lacks visual and sound cues for a lot of actions, which only makes you spam these buttons until the action happens. Only the pause button instantly works, nothing else. I mean, if the most basic action like picking up items feels so tedious, your game has a huge problem. I think this game only required some serious polish and more responsive controls in order to be a very solid RPG/RTS title. It's a shame because if the controls were any better and more responsive, I would instantly recommend this game to everyone who likes CRPGs. I have a very high tolerance for such issues in games, so I got used to it. Underneath those issues, Alexander offers a very solid RPG/RTS experience. The story and dialogue are interesting, although this aspect of the game would be much better if there was any voice acting. There's no voice acting at all, but you'll have a bunch of small in-game cutscenes between the quests. If you think this game looks interesting and you don't care about the issues I mentioned, you might as well try it out. I had a lot of fun with it in general, despite those issues. Alexander the Hero's Hour has to be one of the most obscure games in general, which I covered in this series, and it's surprisingly a very good RPG, which has a campaign that reminded me of Warcraft games, Warcraft 3 a little bit, because it has a similar structure to missions. It's not your typical CRPG where you go from one story point to another and talk with NPCs. Well, actually you can talk with NPCs, but you have different missions that you have to complete. It has some RTS elements as well, and it ended up being a very enjoyable RPG in general. I enjoyed the missions, I enjoyed the story in a way, even though it's a little bit, you know, whatever. But the gameplay and even the artistic style of the game was very enjoyable for me, and I had no idea why it's so obscure and why people don't know about it like at all. You can barely find it on the internet, so yeah, it certainly deserves a top 10 spot in this video. Number 3. Drakan, the Ancient Gates. Drakan the Ancient Gates is a 2002 action-adventure with RPG elements. This was a sequel to Drakan Order of the Flame, which came out in 1999. But C4G, why didn't you play the first game first? Well, I tried, but no matter what I did, I just couldn't get this game to work on my PC. So I just started playing the sequel instead, and let me tell you one thing. This is one of the biggest hidden gems that I ever featured in this series.
But we shouldn't start celebrating just yet.
Up to the point where I'm going to make a dedicated video about it shortly after this video goes live. I'm also going to try again and get the first game to work, and hopefully I'll have more luck the second time around. Anyway, Drakan the Ancient Gates came out exclusively on PS2, and it's easily one of the most impressive PS2 games that I ever played. At the first glance, it might not seem like that because the graphics are pretty bad, even for 2002 standards. You can easily find a PS2 game from 2002 which looks way better than this. However, you'll struggle to find another PS2 game with such impressive features. The Ancient Gates features a couple of different maps which are fully open. It's essentially an open world action adventure which allows you to explore it on foot or on your dragon. I played a bunch of similar PS2 games which are very limited in terms of exploration, so I was shocked with the open nature of this world. Not only that, the gameplay in Ancient Gates aged pretty damn well. But let's start with the setting and the story first. You're basically playing as a medieval version of Lara Croft. I mean, that's a joke, but I can bet this character design was influenced by Lara Croft character at least a little bit. You play as a girl called Rin, who is a dragon tamer. Erok is the name of your dragon, and he's also one of the main characters. The main story itself is pretty simplistic but pretty interesting nonetheless. Mostly because of these two main characters and how they interact with each other and the rest of the NPCs. The voice acting and the dialogue is very decent.
I believe this is what you seek to destroy, is it not?
I hope you understood all that.
The spirits are unwilling servants. We must decipher their meanings as best we can.
What was that thing? They call themselves the Desert Lords, a race of sorcerers from the demon world, Sasul.
Every NPC is fully voice acted in this world, which is also pretty impressive.
This is madness!
You won't find a ton of NPCs, but there are more than enough populated places with NPCs, big and small. As for the story itself, an evil race of three-faced beings known as the Desert Lords have begun rallying the monsters from around the world and enslaving humans. You and your dragon have to find these 4 ancient gates around the world, which lead to the Dragon Mother. The goal is to reunite humans and dragons to fight back against the Desert Lords, and that's about it. I love how this game did quests, and you find a lot of side quests and secrets if you want to explore everything. A lot of these quests will show you dots on the map and show you where you need to go, but you'll have to work for some of them by asking certain NPCs for directions. The controls in Ancient Gates are very responsive and snappy, even for today's standards. The only thing we can consider as outdated, I guess, is the fact that you can't turn your camera with the right thumbstick. You move your character with the left thumbstick, which also turns your camera. Everything else works very similar to a modern third-person action RPG or even a Souls-like. Moving around and jumping feels very fluid, you can crouch, dodge, do backflips, grab ledges and so on. All of these actions feel very natural and not outdated by any means. In fact, this game might have been one of the pioneers when it comes to such great third-person controls. Then we have the dragon gameplay, which makes this game even more impressive on so many levels, no pun intended. You can fly around these maps and use the dragon to fight other dragons, destroy objects and even kill regular enemies that you fight on the ground. The dragon gameplay in this game reminds me of Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, which had an identical feature. However, even in that game you couldn't use the dragon to fight enemies on the ground, they would simply disappear once you turn into a dragon. That makes this game even more impressive in a way, because it managed to outshine a similar game which came out 7 years later. As for the combat, it's pretty basic but pretty enjoyable, and it offers a decent variety of playstyles. You get to fight as a melee, ranged, or a magic character. I played as a melee character, although I invested a couple of points into range as well and bought some spells that I used. There is a simple 3-hit combo for melee attacks, which I used from the beginning to the very end. You have more attacks at your disposal, although I found my tactic to work the best. There are some directional attacks, which the game shows you in the beginning, but I quickly forgot about those. I didn't find the use for these attacks, but I will definitely do more playthroughs of this game and experiment more with different combat moves. I usually tend to stick with what works and only change it if I hit a brick wall, but you might be more creative than me. I would just start a combo from a distance with a two-handed weapon and dodge back when it ends. It works 90% of the time. It's not as simple as it sounds though, because you're going to face range, magic and melee opponents. Even though this combat system lacks some depth, it's still very enjoyable. Enemies have a decent reaction to being hit, and even though the combat is a little bit weightless for today's standards, it's not that bad at all. The bosses have some gimmicky mechanics, and the difficulty of the game is on the lower side for sure, but it was still very fun to see everything that this game has to offer. Enemy variety wasn't that great either, but it didn't bother me that much. There is a target lock system that's arguably even better than in some modern ARPGs. It allows you to seamlessly switch targets, and it also shows you the health of the NPC with different colors. Very simple yet very effective. You don't have to use it if you don't want to though, and the combat is functional without it. If you have the shield, you can actively block attacks, and if you're only using a weapon, you can try to parry. Parrying in this game works very similar like in modern ARPGs, and I use it a lot. The range combat with the bow is pretty simple, you just lock in and fire away. But you also have an alternative firing mode which allows you to manually aim. This will be useful and even necessary sometimes. Magic spells can be casted with B plus left thumbstick, but this was kinda useless for me. I just used them through the magic menu by pressing the button because I couldn't get a grasp of the drawing the spell thingy, it's a bit gimmicky. If you want to, you can combine these playstyles a little bit, but you're also going to shoot yourself in the foot by doing so. It seems smarter and more effective to invest leveling up points into only one playstyle if you want to see the full potential of that playstyle. Leveling up in this game is pretty damn slow as well, but this makes getting new equipment more meaningful. You'll find some very nice armors and weapons to buy, which are pretty expensive and they have level requirements. Different item types like bows and swords, for example, require enough skill points invested into those skills. Your dragon companion also has a handful of different spells that he's going to get as you progress through the main story. It's pretty satisfying killing things with your dragon in this game. These maps are kinda limited when it comes to flying because there are some invisible walls, which makes flying a little bit janky for sure. But for the most part, flying works fine and you can call Arok in most situations.
Arok!
What? I'm right here.
You look well rested.
He won't be able to land sometimes because of the terrain, but you'll get to ride him in most cases.
Hold up! Wait a minute!
Wait, that didn't sound right. God damn, I take it back.
But those are just legends.
Overall, this is an extremely impressive PS2 game that's mostly forgotten nowadays, sadly. It's a true hidden gem that I highly recommend. Be sure to check out that dedicated video about this game if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts. It should come out soon if it didn't already. You're really going to miss out if you don't give this game a chance. Drakan the Ancient Gates is very easy to emulate nowadays on PC. This has to be one of the most impressive PlayStation 2 games in general. I really can't think of another PlayStation 2 game where you get to fly dragons and cosplay as Lara Croft, you know? So it gets bonus points for that, but even the combat system felt very modern, because it has all of the bells and whistles of a modern action-adventure or an action RPG that you would usually get to play from third person, like dodging, parrying, and similar mechanics. It really took me by surprise and I ended up finishing the game. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't really mind a medieval Lara Croft RPG. Like, that's an instant buy for me, so this is the closest we ever got to getting that, so make sure to check it out if you guys can. Number 2. Revenant.
I suppose I have no choice but to take on your quest for now.
At least until I figure out who I am.
Revenant is an isometric action RPG released all the way back in 1999. I had this game on my radar ever since I started doing this series.
So they actually enlisted a corpse to do the dirty work.
This game surprised me a lot with how modern it feels, and it was definitely ahead of its time for a couple of different reasons. However, I had huge technical issues with the game. I spent a couple of days trying to fix the crashes and other issues I encountered on my PC. I downloaded all patches known to man like DG Voodoo 2 and PXito patch, but none of them managed to solve my issues. All of my game settings would reset every time I start the game again, or the game simply refuses to load my game, which happens quite often. The only way around this problem was to simply brute force it, and it would eventually load the game. Yeah, fun.
You are truly despicable.
Only to be met with some random crash, disappearing NPCs that would brick my game, or even my whole PC. I also had no music at all in the game, only voice acting and sound effects. So yeah, trying to run this game on Windows 11 was a nightmare. I played the GOG version, by the way, which is the only available version of the game you can buy nowadays. I still didn't give up, and I'm trying to complete my playthrough despite all of these issues, and I feel bad for not completing the game before I featured it here. That's because this game is freaking amazing. The visual style has that recognizable late 90s, early 2000s vibe, and it's just glorious. I actually think this game looks better than Diablo 2, even though it came out a year before that game. These visuals have so much charm and soul, they create an amazing atmosphere while playing the game. Another reason for that is the attention to detail. How about this walking animation for this drunk NPC you meet in the tavern? Or check out the armorsmith guy, who's a freaking mountain of a man, way bigger than any other human NPCs in the game. You'll get to see some nice little in-game cutscenes as well, at certain story points.
Oh God!
Yeah, this game can be really violent, it has some brutal finishing moves and dismemberments. These are usually followed by over-the-top audio effects, which gives the game a very brutal medieval fantasy vibe. The general look of the game is not extremely dark though, it has a lot of color. It gets dark during the night time, but the saturation of these colors is pretty high, so it's not very hard to see. Another thing I really like related to visuals is the visual character progression. You'll be able to see all armor pieces on your character, and pretty much all new armor pieces you can buy or find have up to 3 different color versions. You play as a guy called Locke, who gets resurrected from the depths of hell by a powerful magician called Sarduk. Your main quest is to locate and rescue a princess who was kidnapped by a mysterious cult.
The priests have stolen my only child, Andrea. And this is why I have made the sacrifices necessary to call one such as yourself.
This cult is also slowly taking the control over this island through magic by possessing humans and other beings. That would be the general gist of the story. All NPCs are fully voice acted, and the quality of voice acting is pretty damn good. I mean, sure, Locke has over-the-top voice acting, but I don't think it's bad at all.
How did you find this out?
I was robbed by some droog a few weeks ago. I followed them into the forest and watched them hide their loot in the tree trunks.
Even the variety of voices for NPCs is pretty good.
You must be the Revenant. I shall not judge you, lest I be judged myself.
My handcrafted weaponry is the finest in all of Ur.
And considering that there is a lot of dialogue in the game, this is very impressive for a 1999 isometric RPG. What's interesting about the story and quests in general is the lack of any journals or the ability to check which quest you're even doing. You have to talk with NPCs and just explore the whole map in order to solve quests. It's not the first old RPG in this series that lacks the quest journal, and it's always refreshing to play a game like this. And a little bit frustrating as well, but there is something oddly satisfying about this. You just fully focus on the gameplay itself without any interruptions, except the inventory system, character progression, occasional dialogue and merchants. The gameplay in Revenant is way better than I expected. It took a while until I realized how many options you have to approach the combat system in this game. I started by playing with mouse and keyboard, as I would with any other ARPG, and the combat seemed very simple but very enjoyable. It has a nice amount of impact and weight, with some punchy sound effects and somewhat silly visual effects. Since the game runs in about 25 FPS, it's not exactly a very smooth experience. Even so, Revenant gameplay mechanics are very enjoyable once you get the hang of them. After about a couple of hours, I noticed that you can play this game in a totally different way, by not using the mouse at all. This actually opens up the full potential of this combat system, and if I didn't enter the controls option menu, I would be completely oblivious to this. It turns out you can dodge in all directions, use a very useful blocking ability, and even create unique combos. You see, the mouse attacks just simplify the melee combat system by offering you a single way to attack. The keyboard, however, gives you way more control over the type of attacks you can perform. You have a swing, thrust, and a chop. Your character can perform various finishing moves depending on how you combo these attacks. The more you level up, the more combat moves you can unlock by talking with your combat master back in the city. There are combos you can make, but I didn't even try to experiment with this yet, because I was too busy trying to even run the damn game properly. Hey yo, editing C4G here. So it turns out I finally managed to find a working patch that will fix most issues I had with the game, which might be useful for you as well if you want to try this game out. It's called Revenant Galactic Mod, and I'll leave the download link in the video description. That's pretty much the only patch that worked for me, and it allowed me to set a high resolution, I can finally hear the music in the game, and it fixes plethora of other issues. So yeah, I can finally continue playing this game like a normal person. Anyways, back to the old C4G. The combat works surprisingly well by just using your both hands for the keyboard, but it also supports a controller. I will probably try to get the controller working, and I can see how this could be even better with a controller, but you have to do a lot of remapping yourself, and I just didn't want to waste time on that right now. I didn't even mention the magic system, which is very enjoyable and interesting. You get these little talismans that you can combine and create unique spells. As you play the game, you will discover more talismans and more possibilities for interesting combinations. You can link these spells to your quick slots, just like potions, and use them with the press of a button. I used some very powerful fire spells, which saved my ass more than a couple of times, even though I mostly focused on the melee combat system. It seems like there is a very decent amount of spells you can create and use in combat, and trying to figure out which combination works is fun by itself. You can also increase the power of these spells when you're leveling up your stats, which is simply done by selecting two stats you want to level up. So this game has a great melee and magic combat system. That's pretty rare actually. Despite all the technical issues I had, it's one of the most enjoyable action RPGs I played in recent years. It's a true hidden gem that every fan of action RPGs should try out.
You seek only a death if you come here, manly.
Yeah, I really miss the times when developers were trying things out and trying to mix a couple of things together, which maybe don't even make a lot of sense when you think about it, but Revenant is certainly one of those ARPGs with some crazy features that you won't get to see nowadays so much, maybe just from very small indie developers, but bigger studios are certainly not willing to experiment so much nowadays, and they're trying to keep it safe. So yeah, Revenant is an easy recommendation from me. You can get it on GOG, and just make sure to use that patch that I mentioned in the video if you have any technical issues. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you probably know that I don't cover a lot of JRPGs, but I certainly play at least some of them, and the studio behind the game I'm going to cover in this video right now as a #1 spot on this list is responsible for my most favorite JRPG series ever. It's called Ys, and they've been making these games ever since 1984, I believe. And the game I'm going to cover in this video has a lot of connections and similarities with the Yi series, and it's by the studio called Nihon Falcom, so I really enjoyed this game as well, and I wanted to cover it for a while, which I finally did in the previous episode of the series, which I did just a week ago, so it's still very fresh in my mind. And here's what I had to say about Xanadu Next. Number 1. Xanadu Next. Xanadu Next is an action JRPG that came out in 2005 on Nokia N-Gage of all platforms. A couple of months after the N-Gage release, it also got a PC version, but only in Japan. It came out on Steam almost 10 years after its initial release in 2016. Yeah, the background of this game is kind of a mess, but this game is the definition of a hidden gem. First of all, it's developed by one of my most favorite studios ever, believe it or not. Nihon Falcom, the same studio that developed my favorite JRPG series, Ys, but you might know this studio for some other titles like Trails in the Sky. So it's not a surprise that Xanadu Next has that recognizable Nihon Falcom vibe, which you'll notice right away when you start playing the game, especially if you played games like Ys. I wanted to cover this game a long time ago because, like I said, it's a true hidden gem. It's not perfect though, it has some annoying issues like the controller support, which barely works, and it kind of looks like a PlayStation 1 game. I mean, I love PlayStation 1 games, don't get me wrong, but for a 2005 RPG, it doesn't look that great. It has low resolution textures and a low amount of polygons, and all of the levels in the game are instanced. You get to explore a small chunk of the map before you move on to the next one. It's not a big deal if you ask me, and there are no loading screens in between. Well, technically that's not true, but no matter which PC you have nowadays, these transitions between the levels should be instant. A lot of these technical limitations probably have to do something with the original version of the game, which came out on N-Gage. I think they used the same code for the PC version as well, they just expanded it as much as possible. Although the N-Gage version was not developed by Nihon Falcom, so I'm not really sure. Now, none of that matters a lot if you ask me, but it's worth pointing out. You play the game as a dishonored knight, hired by a scholar to investigate some ruins on an island. Shortly after you begin the game and start exploring those ruins, you get mortally wounded by a mysterious warrior. A priestess from the town saves your life, but your soul becomes bounded to the city so you can never leave, otherwise you'll instantly die. This is called a guardian trial that's usually reserved for the guardians of the city, but this was the only way to save your life, so it had to be done. The only way to undo this effect is to try and get the legendary Dragon Slayer sword, and this becomes your main quest from now on. It's a simple premise for the story, and the story is not amazing, but it remains interesting until the very end. Oh, and by the way, the intro cutscene for this game is freaking amazing. Here's a little snippet of it. The city of Harlech is like your little hub area, which you're going to visit a lot. Pretty much all areas in the game will eventually lead you back to the town, which is pretty cool. The level design feels great, not only because of that, but it also encourages exploration. You'll always have some reasons to revisit these areas in order to do something that you couldn't do before. So even though the levels are restricted in terms of the size and how they work, the level design itself is actually great. It's one of those situations where technical limitations are actually working in the game's favor, which is nothing new when it comes to Nihon Falcom games. This studio is producing a lot of AA games where they need to make some compromises, but this never gets in the way of the fun. Some of the puzzles in this game can be a bit annoying, but they're not bad at all. So how about the combat system? Well, it's actually really satisfying and unique. It maybe looks like your typical action RPG when you watch the video, but it's a bit more than that. The combat and progression system is simple in general, but it doesn't lack the depth. However, the main thing which makes the combat system more interesting in general is the positioning. In order to deal decent damage to enemies, you have to attack them from the side or from the back. This won't come as a surprise to anyone who played some very old Ys games with the bump combat system. Although it doesn't work exactly like that in Xanadu, it's more of a hybrid of that system and a traditional action combats. The first couple of combat encounters in the game might give you an impression that this doesn't matter a lot, but that's only the tutorial. After you leave the city and start exploring other areas, you'll get destroyed by enemies if you don't follow the rules, which means that you really have to be careful with the positioning. It's a very interesting gameplay loop and very addictive. If you manage to line up enemies together, you'll get some bonus damage, which feels very nice. The action itself feels very decent, even for today's standards. It can feel a bit stiff sometimes, because there is some animation commitment when you use attacks and spells, which means that you won't be able to move for half a second or so, which gives enemies some time to deal some damage to you. It doesn't feel bad though, it just makes you think a bit more before you attack and how you position yourself. Yeah, positioning is quite possibly the most important part of the combat. You have 4 spell slots which can be switched between with the press of a button, a basic attack with your equipped weapon, and 4 slots for consumable items. The mana system works as you would expect. The boss fights are pretty fun and they still have a great presentation. There is some grinding involved in this game, but it's not like you're going to spend hours upon hours trying to get more golds. However, you'll do much better in these fights if you clear a couple of areas, get the gold, and go back to the city to upgrade your gear and level up. Yeah, leveling up has to be done in the city, in the chapel to be more precise. The progression system feels pretty damn good. Every upgrade you get can be instantly felt in combat. The controls have to be the worst part about the game in general. I tried playing with the controller just for the convenience sake, but you should probably stick with mouse and keyboard. The controller works fine in fights and exploration, but it's a nightmare when you're trying to do anything else, like managing your items, abilities, leveling up and talking with merchants. Overall, this is one of my most favorite hidden gems that I ever covered in this series. I really wish this game gets a proper remaster or even a remake that will maybe expand the game's features a little bit and include a good controller support. It's a very easy game to recommend if you like action RPGs. And those will be the top 10 obscure RPGs and action adventures which I played in the past couple of years. Feel free to tell me your thoughts about the games on this list, and would you perhaps do it differently? Did I miss some of the great games I covered? I can always do another top 10 list, in the near future, so yeah, that's always an option. And I already covered more than enough games to even make another one of these lists, but I really don't want to force it and push it, But anyways, leave me your feedback, give me your like if you like the video, and comment on the video if you want to boost it in the algorithm and help me reach out to more people who love these games. So yeah, that will be it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.